Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2022 TMA post-election briefing. My name is Rich Carter. I'm TMA's Government Affairs Consultant, and I'll be the moderator for today's briefing. We're joined by TMA News Editor Fran Eaton, as well as two special guests, Collin Corbett of Cor Strategies and Austin Berg of the Illinois Policy Institute. Good morning, Fran, Collin, and Austin.
Morning.
Great. We're going to spend the next half hour discussing results of the November 8th election, hearing expert analysis from our special guests, and exploring the impact those election results will have on TMA members in coming years. Following the discussion, there will be time for questions from TMA members. Now I'll turn it over to TMA News Editor Fran Eaton, who will introduce our special guests and get their thoughts on the election results. The floor is yours, Fran.
Thank you so much, Rich, and thank you all TMA members for being with us today. I am so delighted that we're looking at a wintry cast out here today, and it really is winter. The election season is over, and well, for a while, let's say for maybe 3 hours, the election is over, and we'll be getting ready for municipal elections coming up in the spring. But now we're kind of just curious. We've heard every pundit under the sun on national TV focused on mostly national issues. And so we've asked these two guys that are very, very well equipped to answer all of our questions on what happened last Tuesday here in Illinois, how it will affect TMA members. Should we be excited? Should we be cautious? We're going to ask not only for the evaluation, but for ideas and thoughts about what we should do in the days ahead. So we're going to be talking about that right away. Thank you so much, Collin and Austin, for joining with us today. And we'll start off with Collin this morning with just giving us a basic idea of the tally on how the Illinois votes went last Tuesday, about the actual vote data. What kind of things did you find in the congressional races first?
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for having Austin and I, and we're grateful to have the chance to talk with you all. As Fran mentioned, I've been doing Illinois politics for, at this point, nearly 20 years. There's a lot of gray in this beard, but Zoom is really nice and friendly with the way they do colors, so it doesn't look like it. It's kind of nice. Yeah, and what we saw on Tuesday was a fairly rough election for Republicans here in Illinois. Nationwide, it wasn't that bad. Which if Fran wishes and you all wish we could talk about, but here in Illinois, definitely was another rough election for Republicans. There's a lot of reasons for that, which we can get into in a bit. But on the congressional level, you saw that Republicans they overperformed expectations in terms of when Democrats did their gerrymandering in their new map. They had higher expectations even than what happened, but even still, a loss is a loss. And so you saw some key races like the Illinois 6th that we had hoped to pick up. The Republican lost by 8 points. Illinois 17 was pretty much an assured pickup. Even Democrats were saying that they didn't think they could hold on to that over the summer. And yet the Republican nominee lost by 3.5 points. And then there were a few other districts that weren't really in play, but we thought we could maybe make close. And those districts went Democrat by a spread of somewhere between 8 and 14 points each. So on the congressional level, it definitely was a Democratic year. I know you asked specifically about congressional, so I'll stop there and leave the rest for follow-up questions.
Just curious then on the outlook, it's still unsettled. Specifically, it looked like 217 this morning for the majority of the Republicans at the federal level. Are you thinking that that's going to hold and that the Republicans will be able to maintain the majority there?
Yeah, everyone assumes that until you have the final counts. You can't obviously take it to the bank, but Republicans are 1 seat away from the majority at this point, and it's pretty much assured we'll get over that number. Even Biden's been hedging publicly, saying Republicans are likely to take control. So even the Democrats are admitting it. But the difference is when you came into this election, we thought Republicans would have control by 20 to 30 seats. Now it looks like we'll have control by a handful of seats. So it's less than what we expected, but still, we're going to control Congress. We're going to have a Republican Speaker of the House, as long as we don't screw that process up. And there'll be some check, in addition to the Supreme Court now, there's going to be a legislative check on the progressive agenda. So it is overall good news from Tuesday.
So the agenda, the Biden agenda and the green energy promoting the legislation on green energy, that type of thing. Tax increases, there was talk about redoing the whole tax system that did currently favor small businesses. There was talk about redoing that and taking away some of those tax breaks. Now it looks like things like that could be slowed down and we could maybe maintain at least what's there now. Are you thinking that would be the case?
Yeah, don't anticipate that we're going to get anything new or that we're going to improve anything, but we should be able to keep things from getting worse. And that's good, because if you head into the next 2 years, there isn't going to be a lot of governing going on. Maybe over the next 6 months, there'll be some of it, but it's really all about the race for the White House at this point. I would expect the status quo for the next 2 years. Don't expect too many things to get worse. But honestly, that's really all we can hope for, right? I mean, at this point, especially being in Illinois, you sort of live by the adage of if government's not doing anything, that's a good thing for us because they tend to screw things up. So if over the next 2 years, it's basically gridlock, I wouldn't count that as bad news.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for that analysis at the national level and the federal. Our members are competing globally. So we're looking at trade, all of those issues that are federal that really are important. And we hesitate sometimes to get involved in those races, forgetting how important every single vote, every single district is on races like that. And especially with it just being 218 with a majority, every single district vote will matter. So that's a good reminder. So let's kind of move towards the statewide races now. That was the other aspect of it that we were looking at. What are you thinking about what you saw number-wise in the statewide races?
Yeah, this is where I keep telling my political team that context matters. You know, losing is losing, right? If anyone likes the Ricky Bobby quote, if you eat first, you're last. But really, truly, being in a blue state, you've got to identify growth and you've got to identify where have you improved things. And yes, we lost on Tuesday. It was a rough election. But if you look at some of the election results, you see hope. You see that Bailey did much better against Pritzker than Ronner ever did. I mean, significantly better. So yeah, Bailey lost. And I can give you the numbers in a second, but it was a lot better than I think people expected it to be, than the polls said it would be. Yeah, Bailey's team did put out a few polls that got people overly excited. None of us believed those polls, so it was kind of frustrating because we knew that even in reality, I mean, Bailey losing by 11 points, again, no one wants to lose, but Ronner lost by 17 and a half. You look at some of our other statewides and they were, from Attorney General, we were within 9 points. The worst race was comptroller, where we lost by almost 16 or more like 14. And so, yeah, there were some tough numbers there. But again, you look at it, what basically at this point is a deep blue state. It's not as bad as the media is reporting. It's not as bad as people would like you to feel. We underperformed in some key districts, and that's why it was a rough election. Not that this state just went so deep blue that there's never any coming back from it. That just isn't the case. So we saw signs of hope, even though, yeah, it was a tough election for Republican candidates. If we can have a better infrastructure and better candidates, we actually could see some wins in some of these key races.
We did a poll among TMA members, and it was around 70-30 on the Bailey versus Pritzker. It went 70 Bailey, Pritzker 30. So we have a significant number of people, TMA members, that are supportive of the administration as it is right now. Could you just tell me how you see that affecting small businesses again, just directly on the agenda of the governor and how he was moving? We were looking at concerns about property taxes going up, and that was the concern. We'll get into that with Austin here in a second. But moving ahead with all of these things, we have a significant number of TMA members that do have a concern that they're comfortable with the way things are. And could you just address that for that aspect of our members?
Yeah, and I would say it's hard to know. I remember seeing those poll results from TMA members, and it's hard to know were those 30% for Pritzker because they agreed with his economic policies, or more likely were those 30% with Pritzker because he agreed more with his social policies. I would assume it's more the second, and here's why: because Pritzker's economic policies are going to be problematic. They already have been for Illinois manufacturers, for Illinois small businesses. They're going to be even worse in the next 4 years. Pritzker's emboldened. I know TMA, when Pritzker was elected, TMA had members had frustrations with, at the time, Governor Rauner. And there was some hope that Pritzker, coming in as a businessman, as somebody who understands businesses, at least in theory, that he would be good for business in this state. And I'm sorry to say that the last 4 years was actually the good side of Pritzker. Now that he's emboldened, now that he's looking nationally and trying to lean into his progressive credentials, you're going to get the bad side of Pritzker the next 4 years. And so if he was okay on economic issues in Illinois over the last 4 years, he's going to take it a much different direction over the next 4 years. And that's what we all have to look out for. Now, for fiscal stability, he's been good. If you're about the fiscal stability of the state, if you're about you're building up a rainy day fund, if you're willing to pay a little bit extra in taxes to make that happen, then yeah, maybe you are happy with Pritzker, and I can understand that. But he's going to be coming for more over these next 4 years. He's got an agenda he needs to push out if he wants this national profile to take. And that's not just a social agenda. So if you were okay with Pritzker over the last 4 years, you might have some troubles with him over the next 4 years. If you didn't like Pritzker the last 4 years, you're going to really not like Pritzker over the next 4.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we covered that aspect of it. And then just to, as we lead into talking to Austin, you said that the governor is emboldened, and that kind of involves the House races and what happened in the House. Could you just kind of give us an idea of how the legislature is going to be emboldening the governor's agenda?
Yeah, it looks like the Illinois House Democrats picked up about 4 seats, and on the Senate side, looks like Republicans might net 1. We're still waiting for final numbers. So it wasn't the great year Republicans were hoping for, but it also wasn't the whitewash I think that we were concerned about after gerrymandering. And really, what you saw a lot of was, there's a lot of systemic problems for Republicans in terms of infrastructure, fundraising, candidate selection, cohesion, unity. There's just lots of infighting. There's a lot of problems on the Republican side that have been there for well over a decade. So these are not new problems in this state. And that's what continues to hamper us. But again, there were some signs of hope. Republicans did well in Will County. Again, they took a seat in the Senate. And so it wasn't the whitewash that it could have been, but Democrats are going to be emboldened. They did have a good election. Like I said, picking up 4 more seats in the House wasn't expected. It wasn't just gerrymandering. They had some issues that played very well for them in the suburbs. And they did better at candidate recruitment in a lot of these races. And so they're definitely going down to Springfield feeling emboldened, especially on things like the Safety Act. They believe this election was a referendum on the Safety Act, and the fact that they won, they believe that means they have a referendum on that issue, especially. And so you're going to see issues related to crime, issues related to criminal justice reform, much more on the progressive side being pushed over the next few years. So there is an emboldening by the Democrats from that election. Some of that could be good, some of that could be bad. We're gonna learn, but they're going down to Springfield in an even stronger position than they were before Election Day.
Thank you for all of that information right on the tip of your tongue. You could just get that out there. I appreciate that. All right. Well, now we're going to move over to what we was at the very first thing as we went in to get our ballots. It took up the whole left side of the ballot. And then I'm not sure how many people read it and knew what it was going to be, but the Amendment 1, which was crucial. And if you could just talk briefly about, there had to be a strategy to putting that amendment at the very first thing. In the past, it's been at the end of the ballot, other referendums that I've seen. So Austin, if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about the importance of the Amendment 1. And I can tell by your face, you're probably not real excited about what you're going to say, but okay, go ahead.
There's some good news. So
good.
First of all, the constitutional amendments in Illinois are always the first thing on the ballot.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Where the real gamesmanship is played on the wording of that question. So I'm sure all of you who came into the ballot box and saw that said, oh, I've heard all these bad things about it. This seems like, the Rainbows and Puppies Amendment. And who wouldn't vote yes on this? And that I think is really, really important context. So when we look at a constitutional amendment like this, it's a massive power grab for government unions in Illinois. You have to realize that vote no has no base. There is not an R or a D at the end of the question. Everything that somebody knows about this question either came from vote no, our ballot committee, vote yes, which had $3 million to spend on this campaign, vote yes, which spent $16.3 million on this campaign, the news, and the wording of the ballot question itself. So all of these factors were really against us, and we were the underdog in this fight. We saw by, and a good proxy for this was 2014, there was something on the ballot called the Victims' Rights Amendment, which you might remember. Similar Rainbows and Puppies Amendment, victims should have more rights in court, right? That ended with 72% of people voting yes, 20% of Illinoisans voting no, and then 8% dropping off, not voting on the question at all. That was really our baseline that we were coming from. And by September, we had polling that showed around 29% of Illinoisans voting no. We were able to move that over 6 weeks to what looks like 37, 38, 39% of Illinoisans voting no. So really massive movement when people got the truth about the amendment. And we were able to shift numbers on this tremendously, really, in the last 6 weeks of the campaign, while being outspent 5-1. So you look at regionally the breakdowns. In Chicago, we got over 20% of the vote voting no. In Cook, 36%. In the Collars, more than 45% of people voting no. Northern Illinois, we had around 48%. Southern Illinois, over 50% voting no. And again, this is despite these ridiculous headwinds, including the extremely biased language on the ballot. So there's a lot to be proud of there. TMA, I know, did a lot educating members on this. There was every single no vote was earned. The yes vote, they didn't have to earn. It was people going, I mean, you guys maybe know this, but part of our election reform was that government workers got the day off in Illinois on election day to go gin up the vote for things like this. If only all of us had that kind of luxury. So I think a lot to be proud of there. And of course, it stinks to lose. No one likes losing. But for being outspent 5-1 and coming within inches of beating this, we'll see they did not meet the 60% threshold. They were not able to do that on election night. And then so the next threshold is whether they got more than half of the votes on the ballot. That is still being counted. We have to know exactly how many people didn't vote on the question at all to know for sure if they won or not. They're going to have a press conference today claiming that they won. It's not for us to say whether they won or not. It's for the State Board of Elections to say. So we're going to wait to see what they say. And yeah, overall, I think a lot to be proud of in this campaign. And looking forward, what do we look at now? First is a legal challenge. So we believe, and most legal experts believe, that this should not and cannot apply to the private sector whatsoever, because it's preempted by the federal government. All bargaining in the private sector is governed at the federal level. You can't just come in as a state and say, oh, there's all these new bargaining rights in the private sector. That's not how that works. That will require litigation, most likely. So if any of your members are interested in being plaintiffs in that or interested in learning more, please contact me. I'm sure Rich and Fran could give you my information. And then we're going to have to win the court of public opinion as well. So one of our goals over the next 6 months is to make the Chicago Teachers Union the face of government unions in Illinois and the face of teachers unions in Illinois. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to chicagoteachersunion.com. Similar to our campaign on Michael Madigan, he was so old school that he did not own his own name as a URL. So we bought it, and we did the same thing with the Chicago Teachers Union. We're making a feature-length documentary on them. You can watch the trailer there. It's really important moving forward that Illinois, that name, the Chicago Teachers Union, becomes as toxic as Madigan's name did at the end of his tenure, and that's what we aim to do.
So could you just offhand mention some of the other unions that really would have been very involved in promoting this besides them, just offhand?
Sure. AFSCME, SEIU, Local 150, any government and private sector union, and all of them were completely united on this and trying to get it passed.
But it will affect the public sector unions directly, as long as the NLRB rules remain the same, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
But again, that I think we will have, one of the terrible things about this amendment is how vague and sweeping it is. So a lot of this stuff is going to be decided in court.
Okay. Which the trial lawyers will enjoy. So
Yeah.
there's
Sort
they
of a
were
feature,
behind
not
it.
a bug. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm not sure where we go from here. So I'm looking for the brains to tell us where do we go from here. Collin, specifically politically, where do we go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with just giving kudos to Austin and the whole team who fought this, and TMA putting their work in. I mean, a lot of what he said is true. We did a poll on the amendment about a year ago, testing it, and just didn't see a path to beating it. And I think we all went into this knowing that this just was going to be almost impossible to beat. So the fact that Austin and the whole team and TMA and TMA's members made this so close that we still can't call it. The assumption is that it will end up passing. But the fact that you all and were able to make it this close, you deserve a lot of kudos. This is a tough state, especially union wise. And so to get something like that to that point, especially with how it was worded, everyone deserves a lot of credit for that. So again, it's rough losing. No one wants to lose, but the path on that is not ended. As Austin said, this thing's going to go to court. And even though the courts in this state are pretty blue as well, we can still find some wins there, especially if we can take it beyond those courts. So kudos to everyone involved and kudos to you, Austin. As for where we go, I think that's the point. It's that it's not the doom and gloom that we see. I did a couple interviews after Election Day, and my message is always the same. 2 years ago, and I know some of the people at TMA I've been talking to, and all of us love Dennis, and Dennis has heard me say this way too much. But I've been saying that we've been looking for the bottom, and I don't think we found it. Even after Ronner, we didn't find it. We have the untold story of this election is that many of the people making the decisions behind the scenes for Republicans, for conservatives, legislatively, politically, are all the same people that have been making decisions for the last decade and losing almost every race that they touch. And so when you see a situation where, oh man, we lost again, you think, hey, when is this ever going to change? Those every year we're seeing more and more of those people, a changing of the guard. They're moving out of state. They're having trouble finding work. You see, we're going to have a new minority leader, a new majority leader for Republicans. We've got a new Illinois Republican chairman in the state who probably will have a bit of a new staff now. I think what you're seeing is a new guard coming along. And for those, I see some names in the attendee list who've been around for a while, like I have. You'll remember some names like Peter Roskam and Randy Holtgren and others. There were some stalwarts of the Republican Party. We all love Steve Rauschenberger. He was a stalwart even before many of those. There's often a changing of the guard that's needed, a new generation that's needed to come up. And we're at one of those points in Illinois. I believe we have finally found the bottom in this last election. And now there's nowhere to go but up, which is the good news. And with new players, with new people involved, we're going to be able to do that. And here's my words of hope. I mean, nationally, despite the news, despite the doom and gloom, if you look at the national results, you look at Republican versus Democrat, they don't have that reported anywhere because there was no presidential election. But if you pull the numbers, Republicans won by 4.5 points nationwide. And so you look at us, I say us, I'm a Republican, I'll admit. You look at Republicans, not winning overwhelming control of the House and everyone's saying, oh, it wasn't a wave. Actually, Republicans overall won by 4.5 points. That's still a red year. That's still a pretty strong year. You look at Illinois, again, picking up 6 to 7 points statewide. This is not the doom and gloom that it feels like, that it felt like on election night. There's a path forward. And here's what I'll finally stop talking when I say this. When you look at which Republicans did well, you saw a model of a Republican that could succeed. And I call it, and others call it, a governing Republican. This is not ideological. Doesn't matter conservative or moderate, liberal. I know each of us have opinions on the ideology that candidates should have, and good. We should all have our opinions on that. You don't need to compromise on that. It's the profile. It's the candidates and the elected officials on the Republican side who were looked at as being leaders, as being adults in the room, regardless of whether they were conservative or moderate or whatever you want to call them. It was the ones that were the adults in the room that were successful, that did better at the ballot boxes. And there's a reason for that. It's because when voters see problems, when they see the economy going down, when they see inflation, they look to the phrase, forgive it. The phrase typically is they look to daddy to save it. When there's national security issues, again, that phrase holds. They used used to at least look to Republicans because Republicans were considered more trusted on governing and on leading and on economic issues. That remains the same today. And so, again, this is not a plea. You see a lot of consultants pleading for, oh, we need more conservatives or we need more moderates. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just leaders and adults in the room. You can do that regardless of where do you stand on the ideological spectrum. And that's what voters are looking for. And I think we have people like that within TMA. And that's my plea always to TMA members is, I know you're busy. I know you've got way more important priorities, like keeping your business afloat, like getting that next job, like fighting for business. But I'll tell you, if you expect to change, voters are looking for people like you, people who have led companies, people who have led businesses, people who have understanding of how this works. We see manufacturers and business leaders do very well at the ballot box. And so if there's one plea that I'll have to you all, it's number one, stay involved. TMA through Rich and Dennis give you a lot of opportunities to get involved. Fran keeps you informed of what's going on and gives you even more opportunities to get involved. So do that. But two, if you can find the ability, there are plenty of elections coming up. And I know in the past when TMA members have run for office, they've done very, very well. And so we need you to step up more than ever because voters are looking for people just like you, frankly. They tend to do very well at the ballot box.
Thank you so much. Rich, do we have any questions from our TMA members that are observing this? I'll give it back to you. Rich?
Great, thanks, Fran.
Okay.
As Fran mentioned, it's time for questions and answers with TMA members. For those on computers or if you're using the mobile app, you can type your question, submit it through the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. Yes, to answer them. In the meantime, I'll ask Collin. That question is going back to 2020. With such a dominant victory for the governor and the Democrats this election, what are the chances they bring back the progressive tax constitutional amendment in 2024? And if they do, what do you think the chances of passage will be? Collin?
Yeah, great question. And I'd love to get Austin's thoughts on this in the future as well. So I would say I don't see it happening. It got shellacked, if I could use that term. And Pritzker has said several times that it's not coming back, it won't happen. I think the best chance that there is that this does come back is if Pritzker runs nationally and vacates the governor's office. I think at this point, the only reason this doesn't move forward is Pritzker won't let it move forward. But if Pritzker were to vacate the governor's office for whatever reason, a new governor in Illinois, whoever that might be, very well, more than likely would push this forward. If that were to happen, I don't see it passing. I mean, an untold story from election night from Tuesday is a lot of referendums were not successful. And so you saw strong Democratic turnout, and yet you saw a lot of referendums that had tax impacts actually not win. And we saw that 2 years ago with the progressive tax, where Democrats did okay, but voters said no. I think this is a frustration for some people who are involved with some of these campaigns, wondering if voters get it when it comes to referendums, why don't they get it when it comes to candidates? But the truth remains that the voters in this state are not so deep blue that they would vote for a referendum that would raise their taxes to that degree. So I think a progressive tax would be very strongly beat back, even if it was brought forward. But I'd love Austin's thoughts because he's most recent on the battlefield when it comes to amendments.
I totally agree. And you look at the context in which they tried to pass it, all the factors were in their favor when they tried to pass the progressive tax. And again, these have to get 60% of people on the question voting yes. I think at the end of the day, it came with, it was around 46, 47 were voting yes. They were so far away from winning on the progressive tax. And what you saw was that actually dragged down Democrat candidates, especially in the suburbs, who had to run alongside this thing that had the word tax in it. And I really, really don't think that that's going to come back. And that was one of the things we were really proud of on the progressive tax fight, is that it was defeated so soundly that you had folks like Senate President Harman coming out saying ahead of session, well, I mean, Illinois voters have spoken. They do not want anything to do with this tax hike. So never say never. This is Illinois. They could get way out ahead of their skis and say, yeah, we're so high on our own supply that we're going to try to run this again, but I think it's very unlikely.
Great, thanks, Austin. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type your question on the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. We do have a question from a TMA member for both of you. We'll start with Collin. The question is, what are the chances that J.B. Pritzker runs for president in 2024? And if he does, what are his chances of winning in the primary? Colin?
It's a great question. I mean, we're going to learn a lot over the next few months. Obviously, it's not a secret that Pritzker is interested, but he's in a bit of a trick bag in that he can't, for two reasons, he can't push that interest too strongly. Number one, with an incumbent president, he can't risk angering the president and the president's base by saying he's going to run. Privately, he's saying it, but he can't say it publicly. And number two, you actually can't announce, you can't say you're running for president unless you file the paperwork. So if he were to do that, that's why he has to play coy. He's never going to answer the question. We'll all know even before he says publicly that he's running. But there's a lot for Democrats to figure out nationally. I know that they don't want Biden, but if you look at the Democratic field, you look at their bench, who else do they have? SNL has very few funny skits nowadays, but they actually had a pretty funny one about a week ago where basically they were talking about this exact thing of no more Biden, who do we have? And they go down the list of who it could be and they go, okay, so we're back to Biden then. I guess we're going to run Biden. Democrats just don't have a bench. And so they might be stuck with Biden. And that's why people like Pritzker are out there so strongly, trying to make it seem like, hey, guess what? We do have a bench. I could do it. And we'll see who's successful. I know Democrats, the donors, and a lot of the elected officials do not want Biden again. He underperformed, and they know he'll underperform even worse. Polls have Biden losing to pretty much any Republican who runs. And so if Biden were to run, that would be great news for the Republican Party and anybody who supports conservatives. Biden would lose the White House if he were to run. Even against somebody like Trump, Biden would lose. So Democrats are privately trying to convince Biden not to run, and they're privately trying to find somebody who could do it. Kamala Harris polls worse than Biden, so it likely won't be her, which leaves you with some governors and some senators. So I think Pritzker's very much in the running if they can convince Biden not to run.
I will only add to that, those interested in electoral stuff, Collin talked about running for office. Illinois Policy, 2 days after the election, just launched what we're calling full slate for school boards. So for the general election, we were able to help around 30 candidates get on the ballot, especially in districts that were completely uncompetitive over the last decade. A huge under-discussed problem in Illinois politics was that you had around, on average, half of all House races completely uncontested for the last decade. We saw the most competitive elections in terms of having a choice on the ballot this year that we've had in generations in Illinois. We are bringing that to school board. So if anyone is interested in sort of getting a taste of what that's like, it's not hard to get on the ballot for a school board race. You need about 50 signatures from people in your community. And school boards are where 2/3 of your property taxes go. So we are helping folks, and guess who is very, very adept at running that pipeline and getting people politically engaged at the school board level? Unions. Chris Welch, our Speaker of the House, started as a school board member. Tara Costa Howard started as a school board member. So if folks are interested in, it's easy. We can talk about the presidential landscape, but really that is like the ground game of politics in Illinois that's been sort of abandoned for a while. And we are getting into that space at school boards now. So you please contact me and reach out if that's something you'd be interested in.
Thanks so much, Austin. And we do not have any more questions. And actually, we've run out of time. So before we leave, though, Collin, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'll close with thanking everyone for their time. I know you guys are busy. I'd imagine getting into the holidays, you're even more busy, both personally and professionally. So thank you for joining us. I'll just close with what I said before. It's not doom and gloom. Yes, I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist. Sometimes it drives people crazy. And yes, we lost some seats. But when you look to the future, it wasn't as bad as everyone thought it was going to be back when redistricting was done a year ago, both within Illinois and nationwide. And we look at national politics over the next 2 years. There's a lot of intrigue as to what will happen for the presidential race on both sides of the ticket. But you look at a really strong bench on the Republican side. You look at how Republican issues are still polling very, very well. Republicans are strong on economic issues, which is what most of us in this Zoom with TMA members care about. And you see that there's a strong headwinds. There's strong support from the voters and from the people in the state of Illinois and nationwide for issues that impact us, for reducing inflation, for fixing supply chain issues, for investing in the trades and in futures that maybe don't require a 4 or 8 year degree, in improving the economy and supporting manufacturers. All those issues time and time again get support from the public, which means that as long as we can get around the politics and the gaming that we see a lot in this state, you're going to see a lot of support from elected leaders for your issues because the voters and the people are with us. Yeah, there are frustrations and you can get stuck on those frustrations, especially living in a really frustrating state like Illinois. I get it. But there are a lot of positive signs, and I would point you to that the future does look bright. I know from an economic standpoint where there's some concerns about what the economy will do, and obviously all of us are worried about that. But from a policy perspective, when the people are with you, everything else does tend to balance out. So yeah, rough Tuesday, I get it. We probably have some rough things over the next 2 years we're going to have to fight against, so we're going to need your help. But I truly believe that there are some positive signs that we can build on.
Thanks, Collin. Austin?
Couldn't
Anything
agree
to add?
more. Couldn't agree more with Collin. We win on issues. And you saw this actually even before the election, a massive win in Governor Pritzker saying that the Invest in Kids tax credit scholarship, the school choice scholarship program we have in Illinois, is no longer on the chopping block. That is because we win on that issue. That is a total coup for anyone who cares about government union power. The fact that we are able to give tax credit scholarships for low-income kids to go to the school of their choice, not restricted to the public school that's just within their boundaries, is a major win. And that program, we are going to work in veto session and in spring session to eliminate the sunset date and expand it. Another very quick takeaway, Madigan in 2012, this was after he was speaker for 20 plus years. This was after he was chair of the Democratic Party for 10 plus years. This was after he had just impeached Blagojevich. The most common opinion of Mike Madigan statewide in polling was don't know or no opinion. By the time he was ousted by his own colleagues as speaker, 71% of Illinoisans disapproved of Mike Madigan. When you look at the center of power for every anti-taxpayer interest in the state, that comes from the Chicago Teachers Union. They are the new political machine in Illinois. And the problem is people don't know it yet. So we are running the exact same playbook to educate people about the horrible effects of their leadership, the radical politics and extremism coming out of CTU, and its effect on our everyday lives as Illinoisans. So I encourage you to check out that campaign, encourage you to run for school board. Any questions or anything you ever want to discuss, just please feel free to reach out, and thank you guys for your time.
Thanks, Austin. Well, that will do it for today's post-election briefing. I want to thank Collin Corbett and Austin Berg for joining us today, along, of course, with TMA News Editor Fran Eaton for leading a wonderful discussion. And of course, we want to thank all of our TMA members who took the time out of their day to join us today. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.